One of the things that God's been teaching us as a church, I hope and trust that this has been soaking in, that the gospel is not just a story of how mankind can be saved. And that's really important to realize. The gospel is not just the plan of how a person can go to heaven. The gospel is a much bigger story than that. And I bring that back up because I think, I believe, I really truly am convinced that God is doing a work in our day to help the church get hold of that fact and then begin to live out of it so that the church can then be reestablished as an authority, as a force, as something that influences culture instead of culture influencing it. And just having done this for decades now, it seems like, 2.5, I just believe that God wants this deeply for the church. I sense that this understanding that leads to a living response. The understanding that the gospel is not just how a person can be forgiven of sin and go to heaven. That's a part of the gospel. That is not the entirety of the gospel. See, the gospel at its core is a story about God, not about us. So if you could remember that, we will be a long ways down the road. The gospel is not a story about us. It's a story about God. And God invites us into it. God opens the doors and says, you and I can be a part of His story. That's the good news part. That we get to be a part of God's story. We don't have to write our own story. We're not on our own. The portal has been opened, and the kingdom of God has come, and we are invited in. And that is really an important part to realize as we go into the Christmas season. So through faith in Jesus, through confidence in Jesus, we're swept up into the life of God. We're invited in. We're welcomed in to the story of God, to the glorious, the mind-boggling, the goodness and beauty of God. And by God's grace, by His favor, by His goodness, by His power, we're not only able to enter into that story, but we get to enter in as dearly loved children, daughters and sons of the King. So, I'm going to have to get my water because I forgot it, and I can tell that's not going to work. See how far I had to walk back because the front row's gone? Felt like I was going to the back of the worship center. Because the gospel is this good news about God, and it's not just how we can be saved. Christmas isn't where the gospel starts. Now, it's not a downer. I'm not trying to minimize Christmas, but I want that to get settled for us today. Christmas is not the beginning of the gospel. The birth of Jesus is not the beginning of God's story. God's story has been going on much longer than that, of destruction, death, even ignorance, a lack of knowing or lacking being able to perceive reality. Sorrow, it describes wickedness. It doesn't describe like literal darkness, okay? So it describes dark conditions that we say, that's dark, that's bad. That's what that word means. And the second one, when he says, they who live in a dark land, that word means shade of death. They lived in the shadow of death. And in that shadow of death, there was ignorance, there was sorrow, there was destruction, there was wickedness. Listen to the context that Isaiah is laying out for the coming of Jesus. It is not anywhere near pretty. Now, I am not at all trying to steal the warm glow of a Norman Rockwell type setting for celebration of Jesus. What I'm actually trying to do, and what I believe we should do, is to paint this backdrop and to look at the original setting and understand what it was really like, and then we can step into it and understand, because there's a powerful impact that's going to have on our life and how we understand and react to light. So no matter how you look at the way these people were experiencing life in Isaiah's prophecy, it was bad. I mean, there's no way to say it was okay, it was just all right, things were ho-hum. Oh, they weren't godly people, but it was just, they're kind of clipping along, and we wouldn't describe them as evil or bad. No. This was dark in every sense of the word. They were living literally in the shade or the shadow of the looming shadow. You kind of get this picture of death casting a long shadow over the land. So in contrast to our warm and fuzzy home scenery and quaint imagery of our favorite nativity, which I love, and the land in the time of Jesus stepped into was ugly, dark, and desperate. It didn't stay that way. Don't look at me like I'm a joy thief, like I'm trying to ruin your Christmas. I'm not. It didn't stay that way. And what we are picturing, the reason we have lights and pretty things, and this is the result. The tree, the star on top, the lights, everything, that we're hinting to the result, but we're missing, we're kind of skipping past, where did all that come from? In what setting did it land? See, the beauty and the wonder of Christmas just gets lost. It really does if we don't see Jesus' birth set in the middle of this kind of misery. And here's what's even more concerning to me, because on a scope of, when you look at a nation, we understand that, the nation in darkness, but I really think it's important for you to understand that your darkness, whatever it is, whatever degree you're experiencing that with, your darkness is an incredible opportunity this Christmas. Because if we got really honest and we were able to be transparent, everyone in here brings some level, some degree of darkness. If we understand darkness as brokenness, as pain, as suffering, as fear, as anxiety, as sadness, as depression, as addiction, as all of this stuff, we bring that to. So what and how does Christmas inform us in our response to that? So it's important, I think, to linger on Isaiah's description. I really do. Romans chapter 5, verse 6 speaks to it, and it says, "For while we were still helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly." Literal translation is at the perfect, opportune moment in history. I don't know if you ever realized it, but when Jesus died, in God's estimation of timing, it was the perfect point. It wasn't just, hey, here's a season, let's throw Jesus into the mix, it'll all work out time. This was at the perfect time. Right time means perfect conditions or seasons. Isn't it ironic? Isn't it ironic that the perfect conditions or seasons were dark, gloomy, anguish-filled seasons? For Jesus, that was the right time to step into the world. He made this pinnacle, he made that debut, if you will, at the pinnacle of darkness when the shadow of death loomed over humanity, when we lived under the weight of darkness and brokenness. And it's still the same way. See, people were desperate and hopelessly tied up in wickedness. They were in bondage. They were constrained by it. They were fearful of it. That was their reality. That's where Jesus, he didn't wait. He didn't wait for things to kind of get okay so it didn't cost him as much. God didn't say, let's let humanity be a little less wicked when you step into the mix. If you were to really look at it, God would say, let's let it get to the pinnacle of darkness. And at the deepest, darkest, most broken time, Jesus, you will go. That's the point when he says perfect. So let's remember this. The backdrop, not Christmas, but the setting for Christmas is black. It's dark. And I believe it's darker than we likely ever envision it being, but that's really, really significant for us and important for us to take in if Christmas is going to be more than a nostalgic time for us to exchange gifts, sing songs, and feel warm fuzzies. We are just missing some of the value. And there's nothing wrong with any of those traditions. Nothing wrong with exchanging gifts, with decorating trees, with singing the songs, with all of that stuff. I love it, and I think it has great value. I just think that we're missing some of the joy because we have not considered the context. So, let me say it this way. The gospel, as I said to start with, doesn't begin here at Christmas, but it does. The gospel erupts onto the landscape, onto the scenery of human life. And I think in a far more brilliant way, in a far more glorious way than our trees and houses and gifts even allude to. I mean, it's more beautiful than we're decorating for. We can't portray it, the glory of the coming of Jesus. Erupt means, and I chose that word very intentionally, because erupt means to burst from limits or restraint. So if Jesus came at the perfect time, and the perfect time was the worst time, the darkest time, it is as if the thickest, darkest cloak of brokenness and pain were laid upon humanity. And then in the birth of Jesus, he erupts through it like it didn't faze him. It didn't stop him. And the brilliance of his coming is made all the brighter because of how dark it was when he came. You desperately need to know this. I desperately, please hear me. There are going to be times, if you are the most seasoned follower of Jesus on the planet Earth, or if you just started the journey, or if you're just considering it, if you're just actually thinking, what is this whole Christianity thing about? There will be times that you think darkness and pain and brokenness extinguishes the significance of Jesus. You think it's too much for this sweet little baby to handle. There will be times you are tempted to back away from the hope of light, the light of life, with your pain, because you will think that God has had contempt for you and he has veiled your life with such evil and brokenness. He's allowed it to happen that you don't have any more value to him. And if we could step over here into this reality and see that there was no darkness that Jesus could not extinguish, that he could not erupt through, you will know that there's never going to be a time that Christmas will shout this into your life, that there's never going to be pain, there's never going to be fear, there's never going to be sadness that can extinguish the light of life that we get in the birth and the coming of Jesus. Never going to be a time. John's gospel says this: the Word gave life, and this is New Living Translation, I believe. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. To everyone. I want your name written right there this morning. The Word brought light to you. You can't back away from it. You can't say except. You can't say but what about. The Word, Jesus, stepping onto the plane of humanity, erupts through darkness to bring light to you. And it doesn't matter how dark you think your life is, or that section of your life that you wish could get fixed, that you wish was gone. It doesn't matter. Jesus brings light to everyone, it says, and the light shines where? In the darkness. Where does light shine? In the darkness. Jesus is the light. Our pain, brokenness, suffering, wickedness is the darkness. Put the two together. Please put the two together for you personally, that Jesus can shine in your darkness. Jesus can extinguish your darkness. I did not say that Jesus would fix all your problems. I did not say that Jesus would cause your life to be without issues. What I did say is that Jesus can shine in the middle of your darkness. And that is tremendously significant as we move forward. So he says the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. That's why I chose the New Living Translation. I believe that's that translation. The darkness cannot extinguish it. One of the translations says the darkness could not comprehend it. So there's some debate on that meaning, but the darkness didn't understand it. But I think most scholars lean towards the darkness could not overwhelm it. The darkness could not put it out. The darkness could not extinguish the light which is life that Jesus brings. So let's stop right there. Just allow yourself to become aware of the depth of darkness that Jesus stepped into your life with. Like when you look at a nativity set and you see the scenery, or you just look at one of these lights that represents everything that I'm talking about. You look at that, and this Christmas you celebrate that you look forward, and you might think, oh my gosh, I have no idea what retirement's going to be, or oh my gosh, I don't know how my health is going to be, or oh my gosh, I don't know how my job's going to work out, or my family's going to work out, and you could have so much fear, but you could take today, you could take this Christmas and just simply know that Jesus stepped into your world, into humanity's reality, but into your reality, and said, there is not a degree of darkness that I, Jesus, cannot extinguish. There's not. That's why the perfect time was when he came, was at the darkest time. You simply don't, you personally, we corporately, don't have a degree of darkness that can't be extinguished by the light of life in Jesus. So maybe you sit here this morning and you think, there's just no way. Would we be honest and say, some would definitely say, you wouldn't say it out loud, I know that. But you could say, there's just no way Jesus would want to step into my mess. I got to get it cleaned up a little bit, and then I can get with Jesus. There's just no way. Like, I caused this. This is where I struggled. In my darkness, I would think I caused it. So I made this bed, I got to lie in it, right? That's a common thought in our culture. I made this mess, why would I ask Jesus to fix it? My darkness is self-inflicted. Well, that's true for every single person sitting in the room today. Darkness is self-inflicted by sin and living apart from God. Absolutely. But Jesus willingly stepped into that. There's not a degree that you can hold up and say, Jesus, you wouldn't want to do this. You're just not going to find it. He steps right into the middle of the mess. Now, there are all kinds of messes, right? There are people that sit in the room today. I'm not speaking of individual. I just know, just in a group this big, there's grief that's unresolved. There are addictions that are hidden. There's physical pain that you just don't know if you can do another day of. There's fear and anxiety that maybe is no reasonable reason to be lingering around your life, but you just battle it at every turn, not just with one thing, but it's just kind of your response to life. Or maybe you just have a clinical type of depression that has just covered, you think is so dark. Or maybe there's a regret in the past that you just think, wow, I don't even want to go there because that was so dark, and I don't, maybe we can just all forget about it, but you know what? You don't ever forget about it, do you? You don't talk about it, but you don't forget about it. I want to conclude today by asking you to do something very specific. I want you to think about the darkness that you battle, that is a reality to you. And I just want to say, and I'm going to lead us in a prayer in just a minute, and I want you to do this if you can, if it's meaningful to you. Of course, I can't force anybody. But I just want you to say a simple prayer, and I want you to invite Jesus into the darkness, into your darkness, into your pain, into your fear, into your shame, into your regret, into your whatever. I just want you, nothing more, not like fix it or let's come up with a plan, a 5-year plan for how to get out of this mess. I don't want you to think, I just want you to envision yourself in that room of darkness. And I want you to hear this knock at the door. And for the first time maybe, you stop and you invite Jesus in. Instead of saying, Jesus, hang on, let me get a light. I want you to just simply, in that darkness, invite him to open the door and come into you, because he will. And I'm not talking about inviting Jesus into your heart, like we talk about, like so you can be saved and go to heaven when you die. That's just not the understanding I want you to go with right now. I want it's simpler. You think about, and I'm not asking you to come up with darkness that's not real. Just think about your pain. Think about your difficulty. Envision it like a room without a light. You hear that knock. Will you today get up and invite Jesus in instead of asking him to get you out? Because what? Because the darkness can never extinguish the light of life. And that's where Christmas began. Pray with me. Jesus, because we are human beings, it is safe to assume that there's not a human being sitting in this room that does not have a battle to some degree with darkness. Some people would say that darkness defines their reality. It's just how they live, and they don't know how to escape, and they try, and they look, and they scramble, and they're exhausted, and they feel compressed into a very small place in life where they have no wiggle room. There are others whose lives have so much good and so much going, but they have this regret, this fear, this place, this one room that they don't like to go in because it's dark. And they never know how to get light into that room. So no matter who we are on that spectrum, we're going to go into that room, Jesus, and we just go there. And we shut the door, and we are, in that place, enveloped by darkness. We can't change it. There's nothing we can do. We don't have a light. We don't have any ability to fix it. But you, and your word even says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. All you've asked us to do is to respond by inviting you, allowing you to be with us in that dark place, because only then will your light extinguish our darkness. And God, as we approach Christmas as a church, I'm going to ask you to let this be a relentless thought, that you would invade every crevice of our light at our willing, open invitation to trust you, to extinguish the darkness, to heal the pain, to bring the light. And we will trust that you are that good and that you love us that desperately. And I thank you for this incredible opportunity to experience Christmas in a very profound way. Would you help us as we invite you into our mess? We ask that in your matchless name. Amen.